But James Allen, how do you think the voice will work? Because you said in theory there's nothing, and it's true, when you have a look at the words that the government wants us to vote on, right, you could drive a truck through it, but they say, well, look, it's not meant to, the voice is not meant to be talking about anything except matters directly affecting Aborigines. I don't see that in the actual words. Do you think it will be limited to, as the Prime Minister says?
Almost certainly not. They don't say that. They make it open to anything. It says may make representations on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and any bill might satisfy that criteria. And it makes what Parliament can do subject to this Constitution, and the Constitution will have that provision in it. And so it, in theory, throws anything open. And let me remind viewers that it was only 2.5, 3 years ago that the High Court of Australia delivered the Love decision, which was an exercise in French deconstructionist mumbo jumbo. They talked about, I got to read it to you here, a bit of it. In this decision, they talked about otherness and deeper truths and metaphysical connections to the land. And they ended up saying that Indigenous peoples can possess certain rights and duties that are not possessed by non-Indigenous people in Australia. It was a terrible decision. I mean, I've spent a quarter of a century reading constitutional cases from around the Anglosphere, and this was the worst one ever. And these are the people we're going to hand this over to. And Mr. Albanese wants us to think that, there's no scope at all for judicial adventurism. I mean, frankly, it's laughable. Now, it is true that most...
Well, that case you mentioned, James, that case you mentioned for viewers, what it meant was that the High Court discovered somehow a law that prevented a criminal who was born overseas, but had some Aboriginal ancestor way back when, could come here and not be deported for his crimes because he had a connection to the land, having Aboriginal blood coursing through his veins, even though he'd been born overseas. It's quite extraordinary. But James, the point is this. Albanese said today, no, we've made this watertight. This idea of ours for a voice will never get to the courts, will never get to the high courts, where the judges can then, start saying, well, look, what this in fact means is that governments must consult the voice and they can never act without the voice having an opinion, and discover all kinds of other rights for this voice. Do you believe him?
Well, actually, I bet my mortgage he's wrong. Look, something broadly analogous happened back in 1982 in Canada. I'm a native-born Canadian, and they brought in a new constitution, and people were worried about how the judges would go completely crazy, because at that point, Canadian judges were the most interpretively conservative in the world. And we got all these assurances, and they put in a Section 33 notwithstanding, and within 6 years, the judges went berserk. They went from the most interpretively conservative to they're more activist in Canada now than the American judges. And this all happened despite top judges and experts saying this will never happen. It's going to happen. I can tell you right now, I bet big money that if you put this in, the same judges who delivered Love are going to, it won't happen right away. It won't happen the first 3 or 4 years. Give it half a dozen years, maybe a dozen. And, just look at the kinds of people who are going through law schools and the way they're being educated. This gives judges a power that's in the Constitution that Parliament cannot second guess. And at some point it will be invoked, and it's going to be incredibly divisive. And we're not even talking yet, Andrew, about the political reality that even whatever your views on the legal future likelihoods, politically, the left side of politics is going to love what the voice recommends, and the right side of politics has the backbone of an amoeba. And it's the same in Canada. And they will not stand up to this body. So politically, when you go into the ballot box, you're not voting for anything other than what is likely to transpire. And what's likely to transpire is a voice body that politically gets its way or has to be bought off in some rent-seeking way. This is a terrible constitutional amendment. And it's terrible.
Look, you make a good point. I saw judges already in Victoria's version of The Voice actually stand in a smoking ceremony before they handed their before they rubber stamped it. I mean, seriously. And I'll have a very good example tomorrow as well of what the nonsense going on. James Allen, thank you for your time.